Hello and welcome. Welcome to our virtual wellness program. My name is Beth Turnovan from Family Services Windsor, Essex, and today we're going to begin with Module 1, Sense of Self. To begin with, we'll look at an overall definition of sense of self. Our sense of self is usually referring to how we think about ourselves, how we view ourselves, if you will, and the value that you place on yourself as an individual. It can also include how you view yourself also influences how you view other people and the world in general. Now, it's important to understand that usually our sense of self is not part of what we call our common language. We normally do not talk outwardly about our sense of self. It more so takes the form of a feeling, a sensation, or maybe the mood that we have each and every day. And our sense of self, in terms of the thoughts about ourselves, usually runs just below the level of our consciousness. So this is why it is so important that we're talking about our sense of self today. When we view ourselves in a positive light or in a more positive light, we are therefore more likely to view other people and the world also in a positive light. However, when we view ourselves in a more negative light, we can also be more likely to see other people and the world that way too. The important thing to remember when we are talking about or thinking about our sense of self is that how you think about yourself, how you view yourself, does matter. It indeed has quite an effect on our daily living. And again, because this is not part of our common language, that is why this conversation today is so important. Because what you think about yourself and how you view yourself may come from things that you say to and about yourself. And this is usually learned sometimes from our friends, sometimes from our family members, and it can also be from the type of environment that we grew up in. Let's talk about a few examples of our sense of self and how we may think about ourselves. So the first example in terms of a thought about ourselves, I'm not good enough. The associated thought about other people are better than me. And the associated thought about the world is not an accepting place. When we take a look, we see that all of these thoughts are not helpful and may stem from our original thought that I am not good enough. So let's take a look at an alternative way of viewing ourselves and how that can stem from an original thought. So for example, an original thought, what if you were to change the thought of, I am not good enough, to a thought like, I always try my best? And stemming from that thought, an alternative thought, perhaps then you may have thought that, sure, you make mistakes, but other people make mistakes as well. Or everyone makes mistakes. And stemming from that thought, an alternative thought, this may also change your view of the world to something like, well, the world brings all of us a lot of challenges, but I have survived challenges in the past, and I will be able to do so in the future. And next, another alternative thought. You are going to be like a detective and look for common negative thoughts that you say to yourself and work at changing them to more positive thoughts. So already we can begin to see a modification or a change to how we think about ourselves, just stemming from an original thought, such as, I always try my best. So let's look at an early activity in our module today. You can see the chart below. The chart says thoughts about myself, thoughts about others, and thoughts about the world under the category of negative thoughts. Okay, it's divided into those three categories. I want you to take some time to reflect on these three particular columns. And this will help us to determine what thoughts you will need to work on. So you see the example there under thoughts about myself. Using the previous example, I am not good enough. Therefore, thoughts about others, everyone is better than me. And therefore, thoughts about the world is not an accepting place. So think about that in terms of how you think about or view yourself. Now let's look at it alternatively in terms of the category of positive thoughts, and just a slight alteration in how you think about yourself. For example, thoughts about yourself, I always try my best. Thoughts about others, everyone makes mistakes. And thoughts about the world, I can survive challenges. So you can begin to see, if we just begin with this activity, that we can have a different sense about ourselves. And it's interesting, when we begin to think about ourselves differently, usually these three circles that you see on the screen, these three components, begin to complement one another. As you continue to get to know yourself in a different way, consider these questions. Who do you think you are? Who do others think you are? Who would you like to be? And what influences your view of yourself? So now we're turning to think about yourself in a different way by considering these four questions. So let's just understand a little bit more about what happens to us in our thinking and sometimes our behavior when we have a poor sense of self. Let's understand where it comes from or where it may come from. There are a number of origins and we're all different. So not every one of these may be reflective of you. Sometimes we feel a poor sense of self because at a stage in our life, we feel a lack of purpose and motivation. At a stage in our life, we may feel a lack of confidence. We may be experiencing a sense of sadness in our mood or pessimism, and that affects our sense of self. We may be experiencing a lack of assertiveness, and we're going to talk about assertiveness in an upcoming module. We may have a negative bias about ourselves, or we may say negative things about ourselves privately. Sometimes our sense of self may change as a result of feeling or assessing that we have made a poor choice in our life. So lots of different reasons why our sense of self may falter at times. So how do we begin to strengthen our sense of self? Well, as we're learning early on, it can begin with how we think about ourselves and whether our thoughts about ourselves are balanced, accurate. We can all learn to bring out our strengths, our positive qualities, and learn to accept ourselves. We can avoid certain words such as the shoulds, the oughts, the musts. Being careful if we have fallen prey to perfectionistic standards, if we overreact to criticism, or if we are feeling that in terms of relationships in our lives that we are being dominated by others. And that can be a cue to begin to strengthen our level of assertiveness in terms of relationships, our boundary setting ability, all of which go towards strengthening our sense of self. We can always modify our own view of ourselves each and every day. And if you look at the thought clouds in the right-hand corner, These are some examples, just a few examples of how we can begin to change our thinking about ourselves and our overall sense of self. So remember, positive feelings about yourself lead to more positive thoughts and in turn, more positive actions or behaviors. So the three are interconnected. Our thoughts bring about our emotions or our mood, and our thoughts together with our emotions produce our actions or our behavior. Negative thoughts can lead to negative actions and consequently negative feelings about yourself. So our goal here is always to interrupt the self-defeating negative thinking cycle and replace it with positive thoughts, which are in fact usually more accurate and more balanced. And as a result, it gives us the opportunity to engage in more positive actions and more positive behaviors in our life. So just to review over the next couple of slides, what does the face of low self-esteem look like? Well, it can include inadequate thoughts, one of which we've already discussed. I'm not good enough. Okay? Another thought would be while sitting at a table and listening to everyone else, these people seem comfortable and at ease. I feel my insides tightening up. In terms of thoughts of inadequacy, another example, why does it seem so much easier for everyone else to fit in, make conversation, and be part of the group? Another face of low sense of self can include angry thoughts. Will I ever feel like it's my turn? It seems as though I am constantly putting energy into my relationships. Someone always has a crisis or problem that seems more important than me or than mine. I'm tired of worrying about everyone else and feeling like my needs come last. You can hear in those types of thoughts a little bit of frustration, maybe some resentment, maybe some anger. The face of low self-esteem, low sense of self can also include the driven and restless thoughts. Doing well and accomplishing so much doesn't ever seem to help. When will I feel finished, caught up, or satisfied? I'm tired of accomplishing, working, and feeling driven. Why can't I stop? So these are just some examples of driven and restless thoughts. So the face of a low sense of self can also include guilty thoughts. I feel like I should be doing more and being more understanding and helpful. Every time I do something for myself, I feel guilty. How many of us have had that thought? Whether it's time, money, or energy, I feel like I should be giving more and taking less. Also, the face of a low sense of self can include the thoughts that come with loneliness, such as, when all is said and done, I really don't feel very many people truly know me. Most of them only know what I've allowed them to know about me. If they really knew how I felt, what I wanted, what my needs were, what I was worried about, they probably wouldn't like me or respect me. And the face of a low sense of self can also include shame-based thoughts, such as, old events in my life continue to haunt me. Just when I feel as though things are going good, going well for me, I remember all of the past events, old feelings, and I feel bad about myself again. Will I ever be free of memories and old shame? And finally, the face of a low sense of self can also include thoughts that are grief-based, such as, there have been so many losses in my life. It sometimes feels like it's too late for me to be really happy. Can I ever get over old regrets and feelings? Or another thought, some things cannot change. Some relationships can never be. Let's talk now about how our sense of self develops. As we touched on in an earlier slide, sometimes our childhood, even our teenage years, can have an impact on us, can be very important in terms of the development of our sense of self. What happened to us in our childhood, how you were treated during your childhood or during your teenage years, may indeed have affected how you think about yourself as an adult. And such experiences can include if you were listened to and praised and were given attention and felt loved, that can contribute to a positive sense of who you are. If you got along with your friends, if you succeeded in some way, shape, or form in school, maybe in sports, maybe in some other creative pursuit as you were growing up, if you were treated with respect by your family members, by others, and if you were given chances to do things, all of these elements can lend itself to a positive sense of self in our adulthood. On the other side, however, in terms of the development of a negative sense of self, these elements can lend to a negative sense of self if you look back and you feel as though you were criticized a lot, if you were ignored, neglected, or abused in some manner, if you were bullied or made fun of, if you were made to feel that not being perfect was a weakness, if you feel as though you did not do so well in school or in sports or other creative pursuits, if you were different and were not supported in your differences, sometimes as a result of these elements, a negative sense of self can develop and carry into adulthood. Let's take a look at what else can affect our sense of self. Things that happen in our adulthood, together with the basic ideas about ourselves that we formed in childhood, can also affect our sense of self in the here and now. For example, experiencing excessive or harsh criticism from yourself or from others, family members, co-workers. Not feeling like you fit in. For example, at work, in a new work environment, in a new neighborhood, in a new social circle. Physical, emotional, or verbal abuse that is happening to you in your adulthood. Financial worries that you are dealing with in your adult life can affect your current sense of self. Experiencing stress at work, losing a job, difficulties with those close to you, for example, your family members, your friends, or the relationship that you may be in right now. Separation or divorce can affect our sense of self. And of course, traumatic events. You've been in an accident, there's been an assault, someone close to you has passed on. Any type of event in your life that you experience as traumatic can also affect our sense of self in adulthood. And certainly, illness or health difficulties can also affect our sense of self in adulthood. So we begin to see that lots of elements go into the development of our sense of self. We also begin to understand that our sense of self can change, but we also begin to understand that we have the opportunity through the way that we choose to think about ourselves, that we can change our sense of self and therefore our overall well-being. So let's look at a few steps then in order to begin to renew our sense of self. As the slide says, step 1, let's get positive. So here's an activity for you to do. Take out pen and paper, and I want you to write down a list of things, anything and everything, that you like about yourself. it can really be easy to forget about these things in the day-to-day, especially when our mood is low, and therefore it affects our confidence. Write down even the smallest things. Here are a few ideas on what you can write about. So what have you done in your life that you are happy with, that when you look back, you can say, I accomplished that. I got through a difficult time and I'm proud of myself. Write down the things that you feel that you do well. We're not looking for perfectionism here. Write down the things that you are good at, the things that you do well. And that can include things that you have done well in the past. Notice I talked about adversity in your life. Have you had to deal with some tough things in your life? If so, write that down, and then also write how you got through those difficult times. Think about how you faced it. And what does this say about you? When you think about how you got through those difficult times, you may also bullet point the steps that you took to get through those difficult times, which can include who you reached out to for support. If you can, ask people what they know about you and what they like about you. Sometimes we don't realize what our strengths are, and this will help you to determine what your strengths are. Your strengths can include a whole host of items: your gifts, your talents, your areas of expertise. It can include how you help others. It can include your sense of kindness about yourself. It can include your sense of compassion or empathy for others. Anything and everything. Write it down on the list. Another step towards a better sense of self. Take the time to acknowledge when things have gone well in your life and ask yourself the question, why? So for example, have you recently made that difficult phone call and actually got something sorted out in one of your relationships? Did you finish that difficult report at work? Have you accomplished all of your tasks this week in terms of your housework? Have you accomplished part of the tasks this week in terms of your housework? Have you made time for yourself? List the things that have gone right, whatever they are, and give yourself that validation. Also, take the night off, take the morning off, take the afternoon off. Treat yourself to something. Keep on reminding yourself when things go right. Acknowledge it, and also acknowledge yourself. So we begin to see that a step towards a better sense of self is also self-acknowledgement on a regular daily basis. This relates to being kind to yourself when things do not go as planned. In life, there are aspects of our lives that we cannot always control, despite the fact that we wish that we could. There is no perfect person. That individual does not exist. So when things don't go the way that you planned, ask yourself the following questions. Was there a part of the plan that did go right? Were there aspects of the plan that were in fact beyond my control? If we take a look at what didn't go right, is there something that we can learn from that so that we can put that into play the next time? Has the world caved in because something didn't go right, because that just happened? Usually not. Yes, it can be frustrating. Yes, it can be upsetting. But will you survive? And will this aspect of my plan that did not go quite the way that I wanted it to, will it matter in a month? Will it matter in several weeks? Will it matter in a year from now? We ask these questions to help us maintain balanced thinking to the very best of our ability. Another step in terms of our overall sense of self, very, very important. It's about your self-care. It is about taking care of you. Looking after yourself is very important. It helps give you the energy that you need to tackle the next day or to tackle the things that you are responsible for in your life. These things include good sleep architecture to the very, very best of your ability. It includes eating well to the very, very best of your ability. It includes to try and get at least 15 minutes of exercise every single day. It means practicing good personal hygiene to the very best of your ability every single day. And it also includes practicing some form of mindfulness. Keep a watch out for our Stress Busting Through Mindfulness program so that you can learn a host of mindfulness techniques in order to take better care of yourself. And also, it's important to actually plan for things that are enjoyable for you and for things that are relaxing for you. So to take time out, make time for things that you enjoy and stick to that plan. Put it on your calendar so that each and every week you know that you're going to take time out for some enjoyment and for some relaxation. It doesn't have to be a large endeavor. It can be simple things. Watching a movie that you have been waiting to watch and maybe inviting a friend over to share in it with. It might be hitting the ground out in your garden. It might be meeting up with somebody for a cup of coffee. It might be taking yourself for a walk. It might be spending time with your pets. The important thing here is that you plan for it, you put it as part of your weekly schedule, and you stick to it. So we're doing something that we enjoy on a regular basis. And it also includes taking the calculated risk to try something new. If somebody offers to do an activity with you, take them up on it. We know that new experiences in our lives is also good for our brain health and our overall well-being. It may include that when able, I'm going to volunteer for something and contribute to my community in some fashion. Step 3, in terms of a better sense of self, really, really important. And that is putting up a fight against what we call the inner critic, that negative bias about yourself, that self-criticism. And how do we do that? By challenging our thoughts so that we land up with more balanced thinking. Often, the inner critic never has anything positive to say about you. It can be that small internal voice in your head that keeps on getting you down. And sometimes that inner critic can get louder and louder and louder. Well, your inner critic is frankly not right. It just thinks that it is. So ask yourself some of these questions here today. Think about the times that you have felt down about yourself in the past. And think about what was going through your mind at the time. It's really important to, in doing this exercise, write these thoughts down on one side of the page. Draw a line down the middle. What were you doing at the time? Also write this down. What happened as a result? Write that down as well. What you will find is you will develop a list on the left-hand side of the page as to how you were thinking about yourself and how you have thought about yourself regarding that experience since. Then ask yourself the following questions about the thoughts on the left-hand side of the page. What would someone close to you say to you about those negative thoughts? If someone else was thinking this, what would you say to them? Also ask yourself about that past experience. What is the worst thing that could have happened? What did happen? And ask yourself for future reference. When you start to move into negative thinking, what is the likely thing that will happen? And will you be able to get through it? As you look at both sides of the page, you're beginning to understand the concept of making sure that your thinking is balanced. There is always an alternative way of looking at a situation. And then ask yourself, which side of the page is more reasonable? And which side of the page is better for my overall sense of self? A couple final points about a better sense of self. Really, really important. You can see the measuring tape there on the screen. That we be mindful of avoiding or completely stopping comparing ourselves to others. This is a very, very common pitfall where we pull a yardstick out of our back pocket and we're measuring ourselves up against others. And again, as we think about some of the points in the beginning of the module today, some of these thoughts can stem from how we were raised. Really important that we tackle the things that we avoid. Every time we take a step and challenge ourselves in terms of the things that we have been avoiding, we gain in confidence, we gain in new information, and we realize, I felt afraid to tackle that difficult thing. And now that I have gone through it, I realize I was more than capable of tackling that difficult aspect of my life. And as you look at the image there, you see two people involved in that. And as we approach the things that we have been avoiding, reach out for a support person to assist you along the way. Two people can bear the burden or the difficulty much easier than doing it yourself. And make a plan. So by now, you may have a better idea of the times when your sense of self has affected what you did in the past or what you find yourself doing now. Find out whether your view of yourself is balanced or accurate by doing some of those exercises in the previous slide. And again, make that plan. Plan beforehand on how you can try and handle situations you are not necessarily comfortable with. As I mentioned, think of something that you would like to achieve or accomplish or engage in. Start with small steps or small goals towards the achievement of that plan, or as it says, on your way up. Try out the plan. If it works out, then you learn something. Keep on going to the next step. If it doesn't go that well, again, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What can I do differently the next time? And find a support person to help shore you up as you are accomplishing your plan. Find a support person who will help you stay buoyant. And as I've been referring to, the importance of accepting help from others. People with a low sense of self can often get wrapped up in what other people may think of them. Sometimes this prevents us from asking for help. And the way that we do this is you determine who is a trusted confidant in your life. Who is trustworthy that you can talk about things that are bothering you, or your plan, if you will. Think of those whose opinion really matters to you. You really value their opinion. It may be a family member, it may be a friend. Again, for them to tell you what they like about you and what you are good at. This is a really, really good way of beginning to alter your sense of self. Sometimes the things that we hear from others around us are things that we have not even considered about ourselves. So it's a very, very good exercise. When we have a strong sense of self, some things become true. In terms of the category of self-care, we know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to self-soothe. We keep promises to ourselves. We keep promises to others. We can confidently make our own decisions. even if we employ or utilize the feedback of trusted confidants in our life to the point where we ultimately make our own decisions. And remember, if we learn something from a decision that did not ultimately turn out exactly as we had planned, we learned something. And then we're able to utilize that new learning to apply to the next decision-making process. Have your own hobbies and interests, positive pursuits outside of your friendships and outside of your relationships that you enjoy, that give you fulfillment, that lift you up. The importance of setting boundaries, which we will talk about in Module 2, so that other people are not making undue demands on your own time, your energy, your resources, and your mental health. To know that you can make your own life choices without the need for constant reassurance and approval from others. People with a strong sense of self, they act genuinely. They act with empathy towards others. You remain a leader of yourself, no matter where some of your followers may go. People with a strong sense of self take responsibility for their lives. They are accountable for their choices. And people with a good sense of self know yourself well enough to know what is going to be good for your mental health. And finally, we want to talk a little bit about the importance of self-acceptance. Self-acceptance has to do with simply accepting yourself, lovingly, unconditionally, including all of our faults and our flaws, because we all have them in one way, shape, or form. So the importance of avoiding comparing yourself to others. The importance of, as I've mentioned, celebrating your strengths. Realize that all people have different strengths and weaknesses. Realize that all people have differences, and that it is important for us to celebrate our own differences and the differences of others. Remember that not everyone will like you all of the time, for whatever reason, but the importance of that self-compassion. Recognize that life is not a popularity contest. You will learn over time to accept your own self-worth and know your self-worth. Keep in mind that there are no inherent qualities or characteristics that make one person better than another. The importance in terms of self-acceptance of creating a support system of people who listen to you, who accept you for just the way that you are. Forgive yourself when necessary. Be mindful of that inner critic creeping up in your thinking, and to be kind to yourself. Another activity that relates to the two previous activities in today's module includes the positive qualities record. So we make a list of positive aspects of ourselves, including all of your positive characteristics, your strengths, your gifts, your talents, your achievements. And you keep this positive qualities record on your kitchen counter, on your refrigerator door, on your bedroom mirror, by asking yourself these questions. And remember, it's important to include everything, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. You don't have to be modest in completing this positive qualities record. So, what do you like about who you are? Anything and everything. What characteristics do you have that are positive? What are some of your achievements, past and present? Again, what are some challenges that you have overcome? What are some of your skills, your gifts and talents that you have, and that maybe that you share with others? And what do others say that they like about you? List it all. What are some attributes that you like in others that you also share in common with them? Is another way of looking at your positive qualities. If someone shares by identical characteristics, what would you admire in them? How might someone who cared about you describe you? And when we think about qualities in other people that you do not necessarily like or admire, of those qualities, which are the ones that you do not have? And finally, this section of our module today having to do with a number of unhelpful thinking styles that can go into the formulation of our sense of self. So the first one being what we call the mental filter. This thinking style involves focusing only on one part of a situation and ignoring the rest, whereby we also tend to focus exclusively on the most negative or upsetting features of a situation, while filtering out all of the more positive aspects. You see the individual in the comic strip hearing lots and lots of positive attributes about themselves that particular day, and going to bed at night and focusing on the one negative comment that individual heard during the day, and ignoring all the other positive comments. This is one to really watch out for. Number 2, jumping to conclusions. There are 2 types of jumping to conclusions in our thinking, and that includes we think that we can mind read. We think that we imagine we know what other people are thinking or saying about us, or fortune telling, that we can predict the future as to how something is going to turn out, often making a negative interpretation or prediction about something or someone. In terms of personalization, this happens when we end up taking 100% responsibility for something that we did not cause or that we could not have prevented from happening. Number 4, magnification, where we're simply blowing things out of proportion. We also refer to it as catastrophic thinking, or inappropriately shrinking something to make it seem less important. Magnification can also involve where we're magnifying the positive attributes of another person and again minimizing our own positive attributes. When we think about all or nothing thinking, it's also referred to as either or thinking, that we're either perfect or we have failed, and we're not able to see all the positive elements and the positive attributes in between. These types of thoughts usually involve seeing one extreme or the other. And number 6, I've referred to this earlier in the module about the thought processes that involve the word should, must, and ought. These usually end up being critical words in terms of the negative bias about ourselves. This thinking also consists of you telling yourself or believing that others have an obligation to do something different from what you or they are doing. Sometimes by saying I should, or I must, or I ought, we can end up putting unreasonable demands or pressure on ourselves or others. The other unhelpful thinking style involves overgeneralization. When we think in an overgeneralized way, what happens is we often see a single unpleasant incident or event as evidence of everything being awful and negative, and a sign that now everything will go wrong. We can catch ourselves in the overgeneralization type of thinking when we find ourselves saying, you always, or everyone always, or you never, or everyone never. Then we are probably overgeneralizing in our thinking. And labeling? Labeling is an extreme form of the all or nothing thinking, and it also includes the overgeneralization type of thinking. Rather than describing a specific behavior, an individual instead assigns a negative and highly emotional label to themselves and it can also include assigning labels to others. And it leaves no room for what is actually the balanced thinking, the accurate thinking about a situation, and the emotional reasoning, assuming that because we feel a certain way, what we think must be true. And our feelings can be strong, and the physical sensations that we get with our feelings in our body can also be strong, leading us to think that therefore, because I feel this way, what we think must be true. The example being, I feel embarrassed, so I must be a failure. And finally, disqualifying the positive. This relates to the first one, the mental filter, where we actually end up discounting the good things that have happened in a situation, or all of your positive qualities that still exist, or that you have done for some reason or another. And these positive qualities, these positive elements, simply don't count. And yet when we stand back and re-examine the situation, and we use the activity of the left-hand side of the page and the right-hand side of the page, we are actually able to consider the positive elements of a situation and certainly the positive elements of your self-regard. Here's another exercise to challenge our unhelpful thinking styles, and this is known as a thought record. It helps us to challenge some of the 10 unhelpful thinking styles that we just reviewed. We begin by the top column and listing the thought. What is the negative thought that I am having about this particular event or situation? Then you line it up with what category of the unhelpful thinking styles does my negative thought fall into? And write that down. Then we describe or we rate from 1 to 10, with 1 being no distress and 10 being a great deal of distress, how you are feeling when you think about that negative thought. Then ask yourself the following 5 questions. Is your thought exaggerated? Find a way to word this thought in a more positive light using the 2-side of the page exercise. Or even if you can simply write the negative thought differently. Try to be mindful of avoiding those extreme words like never, always, should, ought, and nothing. The next step is to think of somebody that you admire. If you were to say this negative thought to this person, what would they think about it? And what would they say to you? How would they respond? Is this thought helpful to you? We know that usually our negative thoughts are not helpful to us. They end up affecting our mood by lowering our mood. Is this thought helpful for you? If not, how can you word the thought differently so that it is more helpful for you? Do you have enough evidence to prove that the thought, the negative thought, is 100% true? And if you don't have enough evidence to prove that it is 100% true, why not? And then you move into what would be a more balanced thought. So rewrite your negative thought in either a more neutral or more balanced statement. And once you do that, sit back and look at that statement. Think about it. And then re-rate your emotion after you have taken yourself through the thought record. Okay? Re-rate your emotion from 1 to 10, with 1 being no distress at all and 10 being I'm extremely distressed or upset about this. This is a very, very important activity in order to help us begin to modify our thinking and therefore our sense of self. And finally today, always include, as we had mentioned in a previous slide, a self-management plan. What does this mean? It means that we can get into habitual thinking. So changing negative thinking about ourselves does not happen overnight. So to be mindful of asking yourself these questions. If I do experience a setback, what will I do about it? What will be my action steps? Go through a thought record so you're able to be mindful of the 10 unhelpful thinking styles in order to avoid that in your self-assessment. What are my support options to help me in my self-management plan? Who are the trusted confidants in my life that can help me manage my thought process with respect to my sense of self? And what methods, strategies, or techniques have I found most helpful and that I need to continue to apply in terms of my practice about my thinking? The importance of the self-management plan is to recognize the early warning signs that your thinking may be heading off in the wrong direction, in a negative direction, instead of a more balanced direction. Thank you for attending today, our Module 1. Next up, Module 2.